Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, as we're getting ourselves somewhat organized here. One of the reasons and one of the focuses for tonight's presentation is I'm frustrated because of the silliness that not only has become this body, but even if you listen to the White House. So the White House is terribly concerned that on Thursday, we'll get the latest statistics from Bureau of Labor Statistics, I believe it is, on second quarter GDP. And look, GDP Now, which is the Atlanta Fed calculator, it's a wonderful app if you want to look at it, is basically saying, hey, we may be negative. And when we were all in high school, they said, hey, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, well, that's a recession. Technically, it's not. Yes, there is a committee that decides it. And that's what we argue about. Has this place lost its mind? So the press cycle becomes, oh, are we in recession or not? Well, it's not technically, if it goes negative, it will be a recession, but isn't this horrible that we're talking? Let's just pretend, stop worrying about it. And actually, let's try something unique. Could we actually talk about what's happening to people, what's happening to the country, what's happening to the budgets and the debts and the deficits? The actual things that will either make or break this society, which will make people's lives more miserable or more prosperous. Because right now we are in avoidance of all the big things. But we do some great virtue signaling bills. I mean, I had the blessing earlier today of my telehealth bill being stolen from me and handed to another member because, well, we needed the politics. Hey, good job, majority. But Democrats, I got to give you credit. You've done some amazing things in your 16, 17 months of absolute control, and you won the House back in the 2018 election. So this is a chart I've had here multiple times, and yes, it is all beaten up. And the number is from functionally the 2021 CBO numbers. Well, a couple hours ago, we got the updated numbers. And for anyone wanting to know why I'm using tape, apparently it's against House rules for me to reach over and use a big marker and write on the boards. But the number we had been operating with is, in functionally 29 years, we're going to have $112 trillion of debt in today's dollars, not inflation-adjusted dollars, in today's dollars. And it's almost all Medicare and Social Security. The rest of the budget's in balance. Well, a couple hours ago, and I've only made it through the first dozen pages of the new CBO report, and you can get it online. It's only like 90 pages. But we've moved from 112 trillion last year to, congratulations, Democrats, you got us to $138 trillion. $138 trillion of borrowing in the next 30 years. In today's dollars. Now, the reality, we're never going to get there. We will blow up before that. But, this talk, the virtue signaling, the insanity of this place when, well, the Democrats are getting here, we're going to pay for everything. We're going to do policies that are fiscally sensible. Well, okay, congratulations. CBO just actually took us from $112 trillion to $138 trillion on the math. It's just stunning. Does anyone around this place give a damn? Look, and maybe I'm a little on the cranky side. I had a miracle happen about 3 weeks ago. I was at home and the phone rings and my little girl's birth mom had a little boy, so now I have a little boy. So my wife and I, we have a 30-day-old baby at home, so there hasn't been a lot of sleep. And I'm holding this little guy, and I'm going, he's only 30 years old when this happens. And the economy most likely blows up long before them. Does anyone here care about the next generation? Does anyone care about your own retirement? You've got to understand how fast the numbers are rotting away from us. But at least we're going to have a debate for the next couple days of, are we in recession or not recession? Well, technically 2 consecutive quarters are not technically a recession, and the White House cares a lot about it because we know that it's about the message and virtue signaling as the economy around us is burning down. And I'm going to show you some numbers here. Could we try something new? How about let's go back to a type of misery index. How miserable are our constituents? How miserable is America and the public? And we're going to look at some slides here that show you just how much of people's wages have been stripped from them. So a simple slide, and this is from the new CBO from a couple hours ago. We did our best to put together, and it's not going to make a lot of sense, but basically what I'm trying to show is $138 trillion of borrowing in today's dollars. It's a pretty steep curve. Every bit of this steepness here that you see here is Social Security and Medicare. How many of us here are willing, I'm the senior Republican, I'm the ranking Republican over Social Security. We're busting our humps to try to come up with a bipartisan way to save the program. Functionally in a decade, if you are on Social Security, you're going to have a quarter of your Social Security check disappear, let alone we expect, just because of inflation, your copay on your Medicare is probably going to more than double. The number of our brothers and sisters who will be seniors at the end of the decade, who will be moved into poverty because what the Democrats have done this last year and a half. Does anyone care about them? And then this is the stuff we've been able to start to pull out from the CBO numbers that should start to scare this place half to death. If you start looking at what they call the alternative scenarios, and that's actually when inflation or interest rates have small variances, and the speed that if you actually go to the baseline scenario, but if you actually start to go to a scenario over there where interest rates are just 2%, 3% higher than the predicted average, you actually get in a line here in about 20, 25 years, every dime of tax receipts. Every dime of tax receipts just pays interest. There's no more government. There's no more military. There's no more medical research. There's no more education. There's no more Social Security and Medicare. How many of you are going to spend your August going home and telling town halls that how you're going to protect Social Security and Medicare, but you're not willing to actually talk about the real math? It's real. This isn't Republican or Democrat. It's math. And this place has basically become a math-free zone. And look, this is a chart I bring up here all the time because it's nice and simple and graphic. 77% in 2001 was mandatory. Okay, this is Social Security and Medicare. These are things we put on formula. We don't vote on any of this. Well, about 10% of our budget is defense. Unlike I had a Democrat just last week saying, oh, you know, no, defense is 10% of our spending. The entire budget that we functionally, truly vote on, discretionary, is now to 13. And guess what? This is the 21. The new numbers, the mandatory now is about 80% of all of our spending. Discretionary, if you adjust for inflation, is basically been flat for a decade. Those are the stuff we vote on, substantially because of what Republicans did when we still had control here. We flattened out discretionary spending. But unless we're going to tell the truth of what's going on here, we are getting old as a society. Last year was our lowest fertility rate in U.S. history. And once again, in 10 years, people on Social Security are going to be taking one hell of a cut. How many people here, when the political class is back in the home district this August, will stand up and talk about what they intend to do to save the program? So now let's talk about the current misery. This is what the left's policies have brought to people. Earnings lost due to inflation. And let's use the Phoenix, Scottsdale area because that's where I live. That's my home. That's who I'm here to protect. Let's just use the since August 2020 date, so it's nice and simple. You functionally have just lost 1.9, almost 2 months of your labor. So you are functionally almost in the Phoenix area. Inflation has been so high, you're almost working for 2 months and you're getting no compensation. You functionally have had the value of your labor stripped. You've lost a couple months. If I make some of the adjustments, you start to realize you get to work for about 57 days. You get to go 57 days for free. So instead of me standing in front of you and saying, well, the Phoenix area has had 12.3% inflation, and if I use CPIW with the other adjustment, which adjusts food and fuel, it's 13.1, screw talking about the percentages. Congratulations. Even if you're part of the population that's had wage hikes, if I take the average wage hikes in my community, you're functionally working at least a month to a month and a half for free. And this has been done to you in less than a year and a half. Does anyone care about the working people? The people that get up in the morning, the retired couple, the young couple that's trying to put their home together to maybe one day be able to afford a house? I have no idea how people are surviving out there. And does this place, but we're going to have a debate on whether we're technically in a recession or not, because that's our talking point for the week. And look here, I'm going to give you two boards here just to try to understand, and we've been trying to adjust. So let's just use something like healthcare support occupation. And this is just the loss of purchasing power just due to fuel prices. And I even rolled the fuel price back down. You functionally lose every month 4 days of labor. You start to think about what these costs mean. So let's use one that's even bigger. Let's actually use this one I love. Does anyone recognize this? This is our congressional calendar. This is the days we're here supposed to be doing the people's work. Take a look. Functionally come down here. You will notice a couple months with X's on it. Those are days of labor you lose. You may get your paycheck, but it has no new purchasing power. Actually, it's lost purchasing power because of inflation. Anyone watching C-SPAN today, how many of you heard people come behind these microphones and actually demonstrate they care about you? They care about your savings, your retirement, your future. Future of my kids, your kids. The average working person in my community, because I represent the community with the highest inflation in America, has lost 40 days of their labor. Their purchasing power has been stripped from them in a year. And I'm going to get a little geeky for a second. Do you know where the value's gone? You do realize inflation basically benefits debtors and crushes workers and savers. Okay, who's the biggest debtor in the world? We are. The United States is the biggest debtor in the world. We're basically one of the wink and nods that are going on, I believe, with the administration and the majority here is, inflation is bad. Wink, wink, nod, nod. But it's really reducing the value of the debt in real dollar terms. Because inflation is a tax transfer from you to the debt, because it devalues the borrowing by deflating the value of your purchasing power. So we strip purchasing power from you, but by doing that, when we pay back the debt, the debt is paid back by inflated dollars. It is a tax. So when the left actually promises, when the president promises, we're not going to tax anyone over or under $400,000, the hell you're not. And in my community, you functionally have just taxed everyone 12.3%. New additional tax this year. You stripped that value from them. And the wink, wink, nod, nod, fancy economists basically realize, hey, but we devalued the debt by that much. So you got the stealth tax. And now you start to realize why America is poorer today. So the Democrats get elected. We just went through 2018, 2019, first quarter of 2020, one of the miracle moments of this country. We closed income inequality. Wages were growing. Inflation was flat. Poor people became less poor. The working poor became more prosperous. The middle class became substantially more prosperous. Wages were up, several $1,000s in real purchasing power. Every dime of that is gone. And look, I'm friends with a couple of the Democrats. And they despise these floor speeches because it's so uncomfortable to hear that their policies have almost been dystopian in destruction. But it's math. At some point, the math will win. And the fact of the matter is, all the progress, this economy, this society, the closing income inequality, the reduction of food insecurity, it's all gone. In a year and a half of functioning Democrat control, it's all gone. You are poorer today than you were the day they were elected. And all that progress we made in that 18, 19, the beginning of 2020, from the tax reform, the regulatory reform, it's all been stripped from you. But yet, we're going to sit here and argue about, oh, are we in recession? Oh, is it 2 quarters? Oh, no, you're not technical. We will do anything around here to either virtue signal or avoid real issues while people are getting crushed. We got to stop the whining, the small ball around here, and start doing something that makes people's lives better. And yes, I can go out and snip all the nice headlines talking about, oh, it's not a recession. Oh, God willing, don't think we're going to go into a recession. Okay, fine. Let's pretend God's willing. Let's pretend we're not in a recession. Okay, let's remove that word. How could we then pretend, could we just pretend you're willing to virtue signal and everything else? Are you willing to pretend we actually care about people, care about the economy, care about the future, care about the debt, and the country collapsing because at the rate we're borrowing? And there's other things in the data that let us know, if you're a data geek and you actually sit and watch the financial news channels and the talking heads and the spokespeople from the White House, you're not being told the truth. And how do you make public policy when it's the political theater is the only thing that matters? It's the spin. We've become an Orwellian body. We should be ashamed of ourselves. I mean, I'm the senior Republican for also the Joint Economic Committee, as well as being the ranking member, the senior Republican over Social Security. We've been holding joint economic hearings instead of doing what we used to do, where the left would have their economists, the right would have their economists. We'd bring in really professional people, and we'd try to understand what was going on and how we could make society healthier, wealthier. And instead, we're going to bring in people, and we're going to talk about the economics of whatever the pop culture, gun violence today, or we're going to talk about, we don't do real stuff anymore. We're basically writing people's campaign brochures now. And this is really important, because unless we as a body can get the incentives right to get up labor force participation, I know these are geeky terms, but our brothers and sisters' participation in the economy, I do not believe we can get the productivity back where we have to be, to take on inflation, to start to stabilize the economy in the future. We got a problem here. This should have been the trend line. And something's going on. We have millions of our brothers and sisters who have disappeared. So of course you got a great unemployment number. We got great unemployment numbers that are really low, except we got millions of people disappeared. They're not participating. So once again, it's spin through not telling the truth about the math. And now it gets even darker and more misleading, and I'm sorry to be geeking out, but you do realize we have multiple agencies, multiple groups that do the calcs on what is unemployment, what is labor force participation, who's participating in the economy. And there's some crazy divergence going on out there. So there's something actually called the Establishment Survey. That's what you get every week, every month on, hey, this month's unemployment, we have everyone working. Except at the very same time, there's something called the Household Survey. And that's actually showing numbers that have hundreds of thousands of people that have moved into unemployment. How's that possible? How is it possible that two government surveys in the same sample times are starting to produce such divergence in the numbers? And I'd love to tell you I know, but I haven't had time to dig into this. But there's something going on there. There's some noise within our economic, but yet we're all pretending, because this is where the talking point the left keeps giving you. Well, we're not in recession. Look at the employment data. Except also, I need you not to look at the household survey because that number is going the wrong direction. Remember, how does the Federal Reserve take on inflation? They break the economy. They break the labor markets. They raise interest rates like they did today. And the dirty secret is, oh, I don't think we'll drive it into recession. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Of course they will. That's how it works. They need to break the wage price spiral, which is real and has begun. You all know what the wage price spiral is, right? Prices go up, so I got to pay my workers more. Well, if I pay my workers more, I got to raise my prices. Well, if I raise my prices, I got to pay my workers more. Well, if I pay my workers more, I got to raise my prices. And you end up in this ratcheting effect, and we are in that right now. A couple months ago, we would have a debate on the floor with a couple of my more geeky colleagues, and they would still want to try to say, oh, inflation is transitory. No, it's structural now. It is built into everything you're buying. So fuel prices go up here, but eventually the distillates from that fuel that are in that mug that holds the milk that you go buy, it's now in the components of production. It's structural. And that's a real problem because we're trying to do some of the math that what happens, God forbid, that we have substantially higher than normal inflation for a year. God forbid it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Even if they start to knock it down, and there you bring the Fed in. So what's the Fed doing right now? They're jacking up interest rates, jacking up interest rates. They're making your life more miserable. They're functionally trying to put you out of work. They need to raise unemployment. They need to create the elasticity in the employment markets. So all of a sudden, that wage price spiral, you're willing to work for less because you need the job. But you already see the data right now of how many of our brothers and sisters are just trying to maintain their life. So their rent has gone up. They're using their credit cards. Now their credit cards are going to get substantially more expensive because interest rates are going up. Now we're actually seeing articles that the Treasury may actually have to write checks to the Federal Reserve because one day I'll do a whole Fed presentation on how it actually works. But when they raise interest rates, they're actually raising interest rates on what they're willing to pay on bank deposits. And therefore, they're paying interest on the bank deposits. Well, somewhere how now Federal Reserve needs to get cash to pay those rate of return on the bank deposits, and they're going to have to turn to Treasury, which is a little crazy, but that's how it works. And you start to think about the math. I know these are just statistics, but they're also people. They're people. And this place has just become cruel. I guess the virtue signaling here is only done when it's a good line for a brochure, and I know, half an hour of talking about economic data, but these are people. And we're trying to do a breakdown right now of how do seniors survive. You do realize how many of our seniors, even with the Social Security COLA that may be over 8 points, but their copay on health care, because remember, some of the health care inflation has been double baseline CPI. And many seniors now have to pay 20% of that. So they're bleeding. The COLA for Social Security doesn't keep up with actual inflation, and it's also a lagger. I won't walk through the table, but understand, we're trying to do the math here of how many of our seniors basically are moving into poverty. And we're trying to do something latitudinal over a decade. By the end of the decade, what population has just this cycle of inflation done? On Thursday, when the second quarter GDP number comes out, and the White House and Democrats are saying, oh, we're not in recession, it's not a technical recession, how many of them are going to get behind a microphone and say, I don't care whether we're in recession or not, I care about seniors who are about to become poverty-stricken? How many are going to say, I care about the family that's having trouble surviving? Where's the empathy in this place? Does anyone care? But we make public policy by feelings, by virtue signaling, not by a calculator. And I accept I sound like an accountant on steroids, and it's my sin. But these are people. And we're going to sit here and we're going to fuss like crazy over little symbolisms. We're going to fight over the naming of a post office. At the same time, someone's going to go home and realize they got to figure out whether they can pay the air conditioning bill or be able to have enough gas to drive down to the food bank. There are ugly things happening out there, and it doesn't need to happen. We as Republicans have some ideas to stop, it may not completely stop inflation, but at least it would help. And the brain trust on the other side, the idea is, well, let's send them a check. That's what caused the problem. Please, can you have some folks that actually showed up for their basic economics class be the ones making public policy here? Let's stop hurting people. This isn't partisan. This is our job. And with that, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, I yield back.